We all belong outside. We're drawn to nature, whether it's the recorded sounds of the ocean we doze off to, or the succulents that adorn our homes. Nature makes all of our lives, well, better. Despite all this, we often go about our busy lives removed from it. But the outdoors is closer than we realize. With AllTrails, you can discover trails nearby and explore confidently. With offline maps and on-trail navigation, download the free app today and make the most of your summer with AllTrails.
America. We are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. By honoring your sacred vocation of business, you impact your family, your friends, and your community. At Grand Canyon University, our MBA degree program is 100% online, with emphases in business analytics and finance to help you reach your goals. Find your purpose at GCU. Private, Christian, affordable. Visit gcu.edu.
Ooh, a spicy question. I
because
love it.
the writing is sort of everything, right? Like you kind of can fix plot holes, but if the writing is
so some
there,
readers love that, and some readers are like, "But I wanted more of this." So it's kind of a gamble.
Hello and welcome back to the Right and Wrong podcast. I am very excited today to be joined by an award-winning journalist, author, and broadcaster, host of the incredibly successful Love Lives podcast, and named one of Forbes 30 Under 30 last year. Her first book, Millennial Love, came out in 2021, and her debut novel, Gold Rush, is out right now. It's Olivia Petter. Hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for coming on. I'm so excited to chat with you. I'm quite out of breath. Normally the introductions aren't that long, but you have been busy.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you. I have been busy. I'm tired.
Okay. Yeah, you deserve a break. Let's jump right in with the debut novel, Gold Rush. It's out now in all the usual places. Tell us a little bit about it.
So yeah, Gold Rush is about a girl in her mid-20s called Rose who works for the press office of a glossy magazine company. So her job is very glamorous and glitzy. She works with a lot of celebrities, goes to a lot of events with famous people. And it's kind of her job to monitor the way that the magazines she represents are coming across in the media. And so at these celebrity events, she often has to look after the celebrities and make sure that they are talking to journalists and so on. And it's at one of those events that she meets a very famous, very charming musician called Milo Jax. And she kind of strikes up a rapport with him, and they wind up spending an evening together. And the following day, Rose wakes up in pain and kind of unable to remember how the night ended and what happened between the two of them. And so she tries to get in touch with this man. And the rest of the novel kind of unfolds from there. And it's about consent and celebrity culture. And it's all set in the summer of 2017. So it's a very kind of pre-Me Too story.
Okay.
So it's kind of set in a time when we didn't necessarily have the language to describe, I feel like no one really talked about consent back then. And it's kind of very intentionally set just before Me Too. But it's funny because a lot of people who've read the novel and engaged with it have said, it's weird reading this now because it feels like nothing has changed, which is a little bleak.
Yeah, it is sad to think that we went through all of that for very little to have actually shifted. But you hope that there is like a subtle kind of change, what we have as a society headed in a better direction.
Definitely. I think things have definitely changed, and, we are talking about these issues more, and there has been a lot of popular culture that has really kind of helped kickstart those conversations. I mean, I Made a Story, probably the prime example of that. And I think things are definitely moving in the right direction, but it's slow. And, I think in the circles that we move in and in the media world, it's kind of easy to think that there is a lot more progression than there actually is, because we are the ones that talk about this stuff probably the most. I think actually when you step outside of those kind of liberal media bubbles, it's not quite the case. It's not reflected in necessarily other parts of society as much.
Yeah, it's like a trickle down, and eventually it'll get there. But these things take many, many years to kind of come full circle. Speaking on the novel still, you are a journalist, have been for some time. There are definitely some parallels between this main character and you? Obviously, Gold Rush is a work of fiction, but how much of this did you draw upon your own experiences when writing?
Yeah, I mean, I used to work in the Condé Nast press office, so that was my first job. So that very much inspired Rose's world and the world that the novel is set in. And I think when I had that job, it was so ridiculous. I was 21. It was my first job. And I was suddenly going to events like GQ Men of the Year Awards and Glamour Women of the Year Awards and, Vogue's 100th anniversary party and doing all these incredibly glamorous, glitzy things. And it was strange because on the surface, it seemed so cool and fun. And then what you quickly realize is how empty so much of it is. And I remember when I had that job, the kind of comparison I kept making in my head was to The Bell Jar, Sylvia Plath's novel, which is a semi-autobiographical novel in which Sylvia Plath writes about how her protagonist, Esther Greenwood, wins a scholarship to work at a magazine in New York in the 50s. And in her head, it was, the most glamorous, glitzy, coolest job you could have. And the way she describes it, one of the ways she describes it later in the novel is how it was kind of silver and full of nothing. And that line stayed with me ever since I read that book. And then I kind of always wanted to write something inspired by that and do a sort of contemporary retelling of The Bell Jar, kind of inspired by that conceit. And then I got this job. And then it all kind of came together from there. And I mean, I remember when I pitched a novel to my editor, I actually pitched a completely different idea based on a father-daughter relationship set in the US. And she said, it's boring. What else? What else have you got? And I said, well, what I really want to do, but I'm a little bit more scared to do, is write a sort of contemporary version of The Bell Jar based on that job I had. And it was only through a few years of really working out what that looked like. And in my journalism, I've done a lot of writing about sexual violence and consent. So it was when I started putting those two pieces together that it made sense to me as a storyline, and it kind of evolved from there. So it's all rooted in, I'd say, emotional truth.
Yeah.
I think that's what a lot of novelists say about their first books as well. And so, yeah, it was really fun to write. I mean, not all of it was fun to write, but the parts about that job were really fun to write because it was very fun to kind of satirize and poke fun at a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It's about writing an emotional truth that you understand and have experienced, and then through that you kind of tap into a more shared experience, and then each reader individually can kind of relate that to different moments in their lives.
Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned that you were kind of scared to pitch this to the editor. Were you scared to pitch it to the editor, or were you scared to write it?
I think I was scared to write it because it just felt more daunting, and it felt more ambitious as a story, and it felt harder to pull off because it was kind of a vaster cultural commentary as opposed to a small intimate story about a domestic relationship. And it's weird because I love the idea of doing novels about kind of, more small scale family domestic dramas. But I think maybe because of my journalism and because I'm always thinking so large scale and it's such a kind of like wider societal level, that it comes more naturally to me to offer some sort of social commentary through the writing. And I suppose that is maybe more what Gold Rush is, as opposed to what my first novel idea was, which would have been more about personal dynamics. Whereas I think Gold Rush is probably more of a politically motivated piece of work, I suppose. Not that it's political inherently, but it's more so than what my first idea was, for sure. Yeah.
It sounds like that first idea would have been a much sort of closed off kind of thing, very centralized within a certain kind of thing. That's it's interesting to know. It's interesting to hear about how your kind of journalism bleeds into your writing. And I wanted to ask, so I mentioned it at the start, Gold Rush is your debut novel, but it's actually your second book.
Yeah.
Millennial Love. I can't say that much faster. Came out in 2021. Was that an extension of the podcast which used to share the same name?
Yes, yeah, very much so. That kind of came from the podcast, and I was approached to write that book.
Okay.
It wasn't my pitch. I'd never really envisaged myself writing nonfiction, to be honest with you. I mean, it was kind of an extension of the podcast and of my journalism. I've always wanted to do fiction, but when the opportunity came to me, you know, obviously I thought, well, I'm 25 and I'm being offered a book deal. Like, obviously I'm going to do it. And it was amazing. But it was kind of just an extension of my journalism in the sense that I was doing sort of essays on things that I'd already written about and spoken about, and kind of amalgamating interviews that I'd done on the podcast and insights that I'd gained about the dating landscape from doing that. And it was a lot of fun. And there were bits of personal essay kind of woven through it. And, you know, I love that book. I feel very fondly towards it and weirdly nostalgic towards it, even though it wasn't actually that long ago. It feels like I was in such a different place in my life when I wrote it, just because obviously things change so much and so quickly, particularly at my age. You know, I've just turned 30, and like looking back in the last 5 years, it's just crazy how much has changed in terms of my life and the person I feel like I am. So it's interesting looking back on it. And I think there is a lot of that book that does kind of feed into Gold Rush in a way. Like, there is a dating app element in Gold Rush at one point. And I think a lot of the kind of anxieties that I talk about in that book do feed into Gold Rush, because it's impossible for them not to, I suppose. But it was very, very fun writing that book. And I feel very grateful for having been given that opportunity, because, you know, it was that book that then enabled me to say to my editor, right, well, I really want to do fiction, and getting the chance to do that. And now, you know, I'm hoping to be able to do that for a very, very long time. I just want to write so many novels. Yeah.
Yeah. So everyone listening, you need to go and buy Gold Rush now so that Olivia can keep writing novels. We've got to make it a bestseller, guys.
Please do. Please buy it. Please review it. Please post about it on social media. Do all of the things.
You mentioned that you always wanted to do fiction. Had you written a lot of fiction kind of whilst you were doing journalism and things before Gold Rush?
I'd done little bits here and there, nothing concrete. I'd entered a few short story competitions. I'd done a few bits and bobs, but nothing properly, no. So I think I had a lot of imposter syndrome and a lot of self-doubt when I started writing it, which is why I went about it in the way that I did. You know, I sold the book on a partial, which normally, you know, you don't do. Normally you finish the book and then sell it as a finished product. But I kind of needed the belief that someone was going to want to publish it before I finished it. I kind of needed that motivation. And I remember with my agent, she said, just write 10,000 words, send it to me. And so I did that, and I was like, okay, is this fiction? Is this something I'm doing? Is this what I'm doing? Does this work? Does this make sense? And she said, yes, keep going. So I kind of just needed constant like hand holding and validation, because it was so, it's just difficult. You know, I remember Elizabeth Day once said to me, she's like, you've written journalism, you know, you can write a novel. And I just thought, it can't be that easy. And it has never felt that easy for me. So I've tried, and, you know, I feel like it's something that I will get better at the more that I do. And for me, the way that I learn about writing the most is through reading. And I mean, I've referenced him in almost every interview I've done, but Jonathan Franzen's writing, I think, is one of the best examples of fiction writing that I've ever come across. So I think I learn a lot from reading him. And every novel I read at the moment I'm very careful and very selective with the books that I read, because I feel like they bleed into my writing style subconsciously. So I'm trying to read only very, very good books.
Right.
High quality, well-written novels. I'm trying to avoid the slightly funner, trashier pieces for now, just because otherwise it will bleed into what I do, I think.
Okay, yeah. Maybe when you're like between books, you can be like, I can treat myself to something a bit faster. So do you feel like it's a very different exercise, sort of flexing different muscles when you're writing journalism versus a novel?
Oh my God, completely. And it's a totally different process for me. Like with my journalism, I can kind of write on my phone, on the train. I can write in a busy cafe. I can write in the middle of the street. I can write on a plane, like anywhere and I can kind of dip in and out of it very quickly. Whereas with novel writing, I need to be totally alone, totally quiet room, or maybe listening to some classical music. No emails, no distractions, no phone, nothing. I need to be in the right headspace. I need to be well rested. I need to be, feeling healthy and exercising and making sure that I'm looking after myself. Like it's much more high maintenance for me doing fiction, basically. And maybe that will get less so the more I do it. But at the moment, I'm quite particular in the conditions that I can write fiction in, because it is a different headspace, and I need to really immerse myself in that world. And it's harder to do that when I have constant distractions around me, you know?
Yes, which in 2024, there are distractions everywhere. Distractions abound. I totally get that, because I'm the same. Phone has to be on silent, like face down, so I can't even see the screen light up. Because if you're in that, I don't know if you're like this, but if you're in that flow state, it literally takes almost nothing to get me out of it, and it's very hard for me to get back into it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the problem. So I need to be very careful with the kind of state that I'm in, essentially.
Getting back onto I wanted to ask, because we mentioned your agent. It's Emma Leong.
Yes.
Did you sign her for Millennial Love? Did she approach you, and that was how Millennial Love came about?
So I actually didn't have an agent for Millennial Love.
Oh, okay.
Which was a mistake. By the way, don't do a book deal without an agent. I just knew nothing about the industry. I had no friends that had written books. I was so green and so new to it all. I just thought, well, I've got a book deal, and people get agents to get book deals, and I don't need an agent because I've already got a book deal. That is stupid. Don't do that. So I did the whole thing without an agent.
Can I just ask, why was that? Like, what was the mistake there that an agent would have fixed?
Well, it's just a mistake because you need an agent to look over your contracts. You need someone to be kind of guiding you through it and just talking you through the process. And, you know, it's not that like anyone's trying to swindle anyone, but you need someone on your team to be working with you on it and like negotiating the deal on your behalf. That's just the way that these things need to go. Agents do a very important job in the industry. You need someone to be fighting your corner. You can't just be a lone wolf doing this. You need to have someone supporting you and backing you. So I did it without. And then when I wanted to do fiction, I kind of started looking at the agent process. And I had a few agents approaching me, and I'd done a few meetings with them and spoken to them. But at this point, I hadn't written anything yet. So they were all like, well, write some fiction and then we can talk. And I was like, I'm not ready. I can't do it without the motivation. Anyway, and Emma came to me and said, I really love Millennial Love. I'd love to work with you. Let's have a chat. And it was the first meeting with an agent I'd had where I felt like someone really understood my voice and what I was trying to do, and really believed in me as a fiction writer. So that relationship kind of then motivated me to start the process of Gold Rush and to get that going. And so, I signed with Emma for that book. And we've been working together since then, and it's been amazing and so helpful. And, an agent is such a lifeline when you're writing fiction, particularly this kind of fiction that is so rooted in personal stuff and is so deeply connected to you. So she becomes more of a kind of, I said to her in my speech when I did at my book launch, thank you for being such a brilliant agent, but also such a loyal, supportive friend and occasional therapist, because there is a lot of that kind of comes into this as well. Writing is an agonizing process at times, and you need someone that can really hold your hand through it all. And she has done that so well. So I'm very lucky.
Absolutely. I've said it many times in the podcast before, like literary agency, it sort of transcends just a business relationship a lot of the time. Like there is
Massively. A
lot more to it.
Oh my God, so much more to it. Yeah.
Yeah. It was a really lovely agent who came on the podcast a few years ago. She's no longer an agent, but she said that she doesn't really she thinks of her and her authors as co-conspirators more than like any kind of business arrangement or anything like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Is Emma, are you and Emma quite sort of editorial? Like, is there a lot of back and forth before you kind of shipped out Gold Rush to editors?
Yeah, definitely. There was. We kind of talked a lot about the characters and where I saw the story going. It was very collaborative. I think that's the other thing. People always think writing is such a solitary exercise, and I actually really don't think it should be. I think it's so easy to get so in your own head, and you really need other people to comment on your writing and work with you on it, because not only will they make it better by bringing in their experience and their perspective, but they can also point out your blind spots, which we all have. And I think it's really important to have someone who can call you out on things that you might be missing out on or might not have identified. And, I think that's why agents and editors, are so important, particularly for fiction, because it's coming from your own brain, but you need to be really open to discussion and collaboration, and be really just be really open-minded about where things could go.
Yeah, because often you're, especially with fiction, like you say, you're sort of too close to it. You have too much knowledge that other people don't have. Whereas I guess I would imagine with like journalism and non-fiction stuff, because a huge portion of that is a sort of research into other things, you're not close in the same way to it.
Yeah, exactly.
The blind spot's different.
Yeah. It just has to be really, really collaborative, and you have to just be aware that, your experience of the world is always going to be limited. And if you're writing fiction, you just need to be aware that all sorts of different people will be reading that work, connecting with it, and you want to give it as broad appeal as possible, I think, in a lot of cases. And you're creating real people. You want your characters to be as believable as possible, and so I think having other people feeding into that is a way to make them more three-dimensional. Yeah,
absolutely. Before we head over to the desert island, I would feel remiss if I didn't touch on what is, from the outside looking in, an intimidatingly successful career in journalism for you. You mentioned that your very first job was at Condé Nast. Where did you go from there to like kind of end up where you are now?
I mean, thank you. God, it's so hard to see your own career as intimidatingly impressive. I mean, I'm always like, this old thing. But I'm pleased it looks that way to the outside world.
It does.
So after that job, it was a maternity cover. So it was only ever meant to be for a year, but then the woman I was covering for didn't come back. So they actually offered it to me full time. And I had the most incredible time in that job. I felt so lucky. I'm still friends and close with all my colleagues there. It was the most incredible introduction to the industry, but I knew I didn't want to do PR. I wanted to write. So I actually turned it down. And then I didn't have a job for a while, which was scary. And I remember I didn't get some big jobs that I really wanted. I think there was a job at Tatler to be like a features assistant. And I got really, really far down the line. And then I didn't get it. And I was so devastated. But then I ended up getting a digital internship at Vogue. And they used to do these 6-month-long internships. And so I did one of those, and that was great. And I was able to do some writing there, even though it was primarily kind of basic editorial work and research and stuff. But I did do some writing, and I think that was a great platform because obviously Vogue is such a brilliant brand name. So that really helped. And then the job at The Independent came up to be a lifestyle reporter. And I actually think I saw a commercial job come up first. And I went to university with a girl who worked at The Independent. And so I DM'd her on Twitter. And we didn't know each other, but we like knew of each other on social media. So I DM'd her and said, hey, I've seen this job is going. Like, do you think I'd be right for it? Do you know who I could apply to? And she said, this is actually a commercial job, but we are actually looking for someone in my team, in the editorial team. So you can apply here. And I did, and, I was very lucky. And that person was Rachel Hosey, who I then went on to host the Millennial Love podcast with and launch it with. So that was amazing. And I then got the job. And I was kind of suddenly thrust into a newsroom for the first time. I think I was 23. And very much learned on the job. Rachel taught me a lot, and my boss at the time, Dave, taught me a lot. And I kind of just worked my way up from there. And then I was at The Independent full time as a lifestyle writer for about 5 or 6 years, until I went freelance in 2022. And since then, I have been still working a couple of days a week for The Independent, and then freelancing for anyone and everyone else, essentially. And I think when I did my first book, Millennial Love, I did build up a lot of contacts across the industry, because when I was promoting that, I wrote about the themes around the book for a lot of other people. So I think that gave me a really good kind of contacts book, which you need in order to be a freelance journalist. And so, I'm still in touch with all of those people I worked with then. And since then I've just been kind of slowly building it up, I suppose. And it's fun, but it's busy and it's exhausting. And, you say yes to everything because you're freelance, so you feel like you have to. But no, it's great. It's really, really great.
That's great. It's so nice to hear as well, that it, and no offense, but that it wasn't just like this very easy, smooth trajectory. It's good to hear.
No,
that it was
God,
ups
no,
and downs.
It wasn't easy at all. Yeah, it really, it really wasn't easy. There were so many rejections, and even, in the 5 years of being full time at The Independent, that's a very up and down journey of trying to carve out your niche of what you want to write, and trying to actually get your pieces landing and get your voice kind of heard, and kind of writing the right features for you, and trying to work out what kind of corner of the industry you want to try and make your own. It's all a long old process. I've been doing this a long time now, so it's definitely not been easy. And I had no contacts in the industry. No one in my family has ever worked in this industry. I wish they had. I'd love to be a nepo baby, but no one in my family is even a writer. So it's been a long old slog.
Yeah. And what advice would you kind of give to anyone now looking to start a career in journalism?
It's so difficult. I do a lot of mentoring for young journalists, and I kind of always try and tell them the same thing, which is to, first of all, just remember, you can pitch to anyone at any time. You really can. I think one of the best routes into getting published is comment journalism, because those comment editors are always looking for people with specific experiences that they can bring to their pieces and form their opinions around. So I always say, keep an eye on the news. And whenever there is a big news story and you have a particular experience or insight into that story that you could put into a comment piece, pitch that to that comment editor. You can always find out who a comment editor is at any paper, and you can work out their email addresses quite easily online. I would do that. I also think just start writing, we were talking before we started recording about Substack, and it's very much a platform that I am still trying to wrap my head around. But I think it can be a really useful portfolio if you're just starting out in journalism. And it can be something that you can really slowly build upon and that you can send to editors. So when you do pitch stories, they're like, do you have any examples of your writing? You can send them your Substack and they can see what you've done and what you're capable of and what you're interested in. And I think, reach out to journalists who inspire you. If they're editors at particular publications, you never know. I mean, contacts can come from anything. And I also always say, anyone that you do meet in the industry, be very nice to everyone because you will be working with these people for your entire career. I'm still working alongside people that I interned with when I was 20, 21. Yeah. And those people commission me now, so just always bear that in mind. I think be kind to everyone is always really good advice.
Yeah, because these industries are much smaller than they seem.
Oh God, yeah, way smaller. Yeah, and people stay in them.
Yes, absolutely. I think publishing is the same as well when you talk about novels and things like that.
Totally.
Editors are often moving around, but they're always present and things like that. So
yeah.
No, that's great. A lot of good advice in there. And now we'll saunter over to the desert island and I will ask you, Olivia, if you were stranded on a desert island with a single book, which book do you hope that it would be?
It would have to be The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, I think. Because I've learned so much from that book and from Plath's writing more generally and from her poetry, and her prose is so lyrical and so not the way that I write, but I just find it so beautiful to read, and I think it's so visual, and she has a way of describing experiences and things that are somehow both really complex and really simple at the same time, and that makes for such compelling reading. And I don't think I would ever get bored reading her writing, so that's why I'd have to say The Bell Jar.
Yeah, it sounds like that book has had a deeply profound effect on you, which is great. I love it when you find a book that really stays with you probably for the rest of your life.
Definitely has, yeah.
And I presume that's probably the dream of an author as well, is to write a book that just stays with people.
Oh God, yeah. That's the goal, isn't it? To write something that people can, I suppose, refer back to throughout their life, and not necessarily people who are writers, but I guess the goal is to make someone feel seen, and to make someone feel understood. And that's what that book did and continues to do for me. And that's what I would always hope that my writing could be capable of doing for other people. Yeah.
It's about, for me, it's like A Monster Calls is a book that kind of, I don't know if it was necessarily about being seen, but it was about sort of reflecting on my own self and learning something new about me through that book. And that's the goal for any kind of really powerful book. Yeah, like that.
Totally.
Awesome. Next up, I've got some questions about the podcast and everything that's going on with that. Olivia's writing process and being on the 30 under 30 list, but that's going to be in the extended episode exclusive to my incredible Patreon subscribers. That's it. You'll always be under 30, according to the internet.
Yeah.
Amazing. So. Well, that's a great way to round off the episode. Thank you so much, Olivia, for coming on the podcast and telling us all about your writing and your experiences and the new book, Gold Rush. It's been awesome chatting with you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely to chat to you. I really appreciate it.
And for anyone listening wanting to keep up with what Olivia is doing, you can follow her on Twitter at Olivia Petter1, on Instagram at Olivia Petter, or you can go to her website, oliviapetter.co.uk. The debut novel Gold Rush is out right now in all the usual places. To support the podcast, like, follow and subscribe, join the Patreon for ad-free extended episodes, and check out my other podcast, The Chosen Ones and Other Tropes. Thanks again, Olivia, and thanks to everyone listening. We will catch you on the next episode.